All right. Hey there, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. It's another Seattle Data Guide Live. It's been a little bit, I think, but hopefully everyone's doing well. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about consulting, kind of how AI might be impacting it. We saw a post was kind of brought out in the Technical Freelancer Academy group that I have by Christine here, and she was kind of had some thoughts there, and I wanted her to share some of them. Hey there, Christine. Thanks so much for joining us. So you've been working kind of in the consulting space in, I think, a few different aspects, both for yourself as well as for several companies for the last few years now. So I'd love to give a quick intro about you, and yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah, thanks. It was really fun to join the Technical Freelancer Academy and just seeing people share their insights. I think the biggest thing with consulting is that we have a lot of individualized experiences and then some that we kind of come together on. So for me, I started consulting at a software company back in around 2011. And I did projects in-house solution delivery for them. I didn't realize till after the fact that I was essentially a business analyst and not a pricing consultant, but sometimes you learn too late. And after that experience, I did some of my own software implementation projects and have done some strategy and some, basic ML projects. And the more that I work in the data space, the more that I've been drawn into data engineering and data modeling. And I think that's how I found your community and Joe Reese and some of the folks that are contributing there.
Yeah. I love Joe Reese. He's great. We just did a quick recording. He's putting out a Coursera course soon, so I got to be a little snippet of that. But yeah, no, it's a great community. In terms of like your experience consulting for yourself, what's that been like? Like, how did you kind of start doing that?
Well, I perennially quit jobs. I'm not a great full-time employee, I would say. I really love working on project-based work where there's a definitive scope, kind of a beginning, middle, and end. There's deliverables where my contribution within the project is known and defined. And then I also really have never sought out a management career. I don't want to manage other adults in my professional life. I just want to work with them. And so I feel like consulting is a great space for somebody who wants to be more of an individual contributor and wants to have a bounded scope to their contribution and to allow you to specialize. So I think over time that has played out for me that I've been able to find a bit of a niche within pricing and the more data-centric side of pricing, more quantitative side.
Yeah. I guess, so would you say it's like a pretty good niche and that still is it still pretty, I mean, it must still be in demand, because I feel like what role does what do you call it? Like dynamic pricing play? Like, do you do some work in dynamic pricing? Do you do work in kind of trying to find like what pricing should be kind of implemented through the more straightforward analytics?
Yeah, it's funny. I have a friend who just moved back from New Zealand. She's an arborist, and she was introducing me at a party, and she was trying to frame what I did. And it was really flattering to try and hear her say that I know things that she doesn't know, because we all experience price and value trade-offs as consumers. And we have to frame our own services in the marketplace, even as an employee. And there are some things that work in a business to consumer context and things that work in B2B with large negotiations or multi-year deal life cycles that are different. And there are some nuances to understanding that. And especially as we've seen the shift from on-prem to software as a service, there's definitely different monetization models. And you can develop expertise to become more aware of those nuances. But surprisingly, we as consumers know quite a bit about how pricing intuitively works and how people respond to prices. And at the end of the day, even in business to business environments, you're negotiating with other humans. And so a lot of that same mindset can be applied That said, there have been hilarious instances in my career where people try and jump tracks or translate ideas from one discipline into another. And a lot of consulting is helping people to know when those are just not applicable. And so, one really good example of that was I was working as a pricing analyst at Capella Education Company, so online for-profit education. And some of the product managers or the folks who manage different degree tracks, one of them had come from Target, which is a big business to consumer retailer. And she talked about pricing PhD and master's level tuition programs as though they were like shirts on a discount rack with this like demand schedule.
Interesting.
And you just wait for them to say it out loud and then hear the differences, that like you don't make the same type of purchase decision for the 25% off shirt that you do for an MBA.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of consulting is just helping people frame their thinking.
Yeah. I think that's pretty funny to hear someone say, like, try to like almost put those things on a similar level, because it's different motivations, different reasonings. It's like, oh yeah, would you like 25% off your MBA? Does that make you feel better? Maybe about the MBA itself. That's funny. So yeah, I think we or the reason I asked you for this discussion was twofold. One was pricing, like also pricing around consulting projects, but also the first, again, you brought up a post, which let me bring it up here so we can kind of see it. Share screen.
One of the folks who probably doesn't know that I follow his every word.
Oh, yes. Let's see. I probably should try zooming in a little bit. Let's see. Yeah, that's a little better. So yeah, basically, this post was kind of talking about AI and its impact on kind of freelancing gigs. So, we're just reading through it lightly, right? The question is first posed, is AI eating your freelance gigs? And I can kind of just read through it. In recent months, I saw a lot of discussions around AI and freelancing in digital, both with similar conclusions. Now I found a study that addresses this problem, pointing at concrete numbers. The findings are interesting, and let me break it down for you. Automation-prone jobs are getting hit the hardest. The study looked at jobs posting on a major global freelancing platform from 2021 to 2023. It found that within 8 months of ChatGPT's launch in November 2022, demand for automation-prone freelancing jobs like writing, software development, and engineering dropped 21% compared to manual-intensive jobs like data entry. Writing jobs saw the biggest decline at 30%, followed by software, which was 21%, and engineering at 10%. AI, another point was AI is coming for creatives too. It's not just writing and tech jobs. The rise of AI, image generators like DALL-E, Midjourney, and Stable Diffusion in 2022 led to a 17% decrease in job posts for graphic design and 3D modeling compared to manual jobs. Then he says awareness matters. The bigger the buzz about an AI tool, its ability to do a certain job, the bigger the drop in demand for those freelance gigs. Next point was we have short-term pain and long-term uncertainty. The study provides some of the first hard evidence of generative AI already displacing human workers, at least in the freelance world. Impacted freelancers are likely to be face far more competition and lower earnings in the near term. What's important is that the authors note the long-term impacts are still unclear. While AI may eat into the market for certain skills, it could also boost overall productivity and create new opportunities. The effects on the broader labor market remains to be seen. And then, he kind of shared some of his thoughts afterwards, but maybe we can kind of dig into here in a second. Just kind of wanted to get some thoughts from you there in terms of like, have you seen or had any conversations similar to this in real life?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are trying to do the human capital labor like trade-off. They're trying to find cheaper solutions for existing problems. And a lot of what I see in generative AI looks like solutions in search of problems, not so much the fully baked implementation.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of thoughts around the last mile problem and converting things from betas and demos to fully blown enterprise grade solutions. And then, I love the quote, the William Gibson quote, that the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. And so there are people who are getting on board and adopting productivity tools, coding tools, IntelliSense. There's all sorts of things that are being integrated into our daily lives. You just don't realize necessarily that they are AI. So you don't realize that every time you get a spelling correction or grammar suggestions, like that's kind of a low key way that it's being integrated into your life. We're looking for some of the things that hit you on your head, or chatbots. And I think we forget how ubiquitous some of the smaller use cases are. So I think that they're helping us as much as hurting us in a distributed way.
Mm-hmm.
I really believe in the idea of human machine teaming, that the most productive people are going to be the ones who find the ways to use the tools the best. And that's true even not of AI tools, but really any tool throughout history. So nothing particularly new there, except for the pace of change and the just absolute sprawl of things that we feel like we need to get a pulse on is entirely overwhelming. And you can distract yourself from any sort of productive work if you're constantly chasing new things. So those are kind of my main thoughts, was like solutions in search of problems, human machine teaming. And then if you think about the bottlenecks over human history, I think the other point that I made in your portal when we were talking about this was that I had read this book years ago, The Empire of Cotton, and it talks about innovation in essentially fabric production. And you think of the cotton gin, you think of power looms, you think of, the dye houses, you think of steam powered factories, and all of those things came over time, and they shifted the production of fabrics from India to England to North America. They changed agriculture. They had profound impacts on the entire supply chain. And what would happen is, as one aspect of the supply chain got more and more automated and mechanized, the return on people's work diminished in that place if they were doing it without those automated tools. And so it really obliterated cottage industry, where people were farming cotton alongside food crops, and they had this independence. But on a unit scale, the economics were so good that it just completely replaced that. And so I think you're going to see some of those trends in the AI fields. But saying AI always kind of bothers me. It's such a broad term and it's so specific. So I think you do have to have very specific use cases that you want to focus on. And then you can look at the entire supply chain or the entire industry effect the way that you would with material production for something like cotton and cloth.
Yeah. I am curious in terms of with the reference to cotton products, because one of the things that currently I feel with AI, and obviously things get better, is that the output is generally not as good, right? Like if you talk about writing output, it's terrible, right? It's the most generic thing you've ever seen. So I wonder, was there a point in history where that was kind of very similar for maybe the output of automating shirts or something?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's still true to an extent, right? You're not going to buy, it depends on your budget, but you're not going to buy a wedding dress from Zara. There are people who are going to tailors and who still want a crafted level of skill that's beyond mass production. And then there's a lot of people, I did pottery in college. My pottery's absolutely horrendously bad. It's at a lower level of skill than what mass production can attain. Yeah. And so, you can't have nested bowls that fit in your closet if you throw them yourself at my level of skill. And I just think you're going to see that on both ends, that there's higher and lower skill. And that really makes me think about this last mile problem of, for critical use cases and for where you just can't allow a high margin of error, what are those human machine teaming setups that can get the benefit of that production scale of data usage, but then you tailor it to the point where it's actually useful. I think you're seeing that for sure with knowledge graphs being integrated into RAG models, and you're seeing it, like, people are solving for how to get the right context so that things are actually usable.
Yeah, I think that's kind of maybe what the author kind of references towards the end here. One, let's see, just to kind of finish this one off. So just his final thoughts after all that was like, for me, these results are concerning, but not totally surprising. Many of the most impacted fields like writing and graphic design have already been feeling the heat of AI for a while now. If you're a freelancer, like I am, you should treat it like a wake-up call. First of all, take a hard look at your skill set and consider how you can adapt and differentiate yourself in an AI world. What worked wonders for me was two things. First, doubling down on uniquely human skills, and second, learning to work with AI tools instead of against them. When it comes to the business, these numbers highlight the need to think carefully about how to responsibly leverage AI to augment human workers, not to replace them. I will tell it once again, the human touch still matters. One thing is clear, the future is already here. Oh, this was kind of what you said. For many freelancers, evolve or get left behind. Sorry for that. I wonder also if you've noticed these impacts and how they played out for you. So then you asked the classic, let me know your thoughts point. I think that's kind of what you were saying earlier, just that, it's going to be this like human computer interaction, human, and again, AI is kind of an interesting term to use all the time. So maybe use it sparingly, but yeah, like figuring out what works together, but then also figuring out what you do that really differentiates yourself from whatever technology people do use. And like kind of like you referenced earlier with even pottery, like you have to then be that much better, right? It's not going to be the people that are average or slightly below average that probably will do well. It would have to be the people that exceed in a space that will continue to probably do well in that space.
Yeah, that's really true. I think in economics, they talk about this creaming effect where there's this just really disproportionate advantage from being in the upper few percentile, or the tournament effect where you play a lot of rounds. And this happens absolutely in consulting, where you get a seat to bid a project, right? And you're in front of the right audience. But if you don't get selected, it's all a negative outcome for you. You've just prepared for it and spent time in it without any income. And so the centralization of information and the power of big data, it really comes at scale and at a scale of good quality. So you're seeing this with the software as a service providers too, where they're able to build benchmarking data sets, and they can take kind of more traditional industries and they can be innovative from an analytics and a data perspective, even for things like, electricians and facility services companies, and the more, you don't think of them as being in the data space, but they are hiring data professionals. And so it's unclear, I think, if this is going to go more on the software development app side of the wins, or if it's going to go a lot into the implementation consultants and the integrators, the data engineers. I think there's definitely a benefit for either of those sides of the equation. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of the kind of Main Street companies who are trying to adopt this, they're just adding cost to their standard business model, that it's now table stakes to be participating in the big data analytics economy. And it's not actually giving them an advantage, that all the lawyers and software engineers are getting a lot of the gain from this revolution.
Yeah. So are you saying that, like, just because, again, like, let's say you're a giant conglomerate electrician company, right? You've just like swallowed 50 of them. Maybe a PE firm bought you, and so now you're doing, whatever the PE firm thing. And so, yes, you have to do data analytics, but like you said, is it just you feel like it's just adding cost to the bottom to take away from your bottom line essentially? And like, yeah, maybe it's providing some benefit, but only in the sense that you're not losing.
Yeah, I think you have to run fast to stand still. They call it like the Red Queen problem, where, Alice in Wonderland, she has to run twice as fast just to stay stationary. There is some of that where the world that we live in is so competitive. It's very hard to sustain an analytics advantage as these technologies become so mainstream. Like, I think if you look at advances in auto ML, like the power that you can process a model in Google Colabs or essentially like free off the shelf tools is mind boggling. I graduated from college in 2006 and we were using Minitab and all these on-prem programs like SPSS and SAS, and open source existed, but I didn't know about it. And now you can see, if you want to go on YouTube or if you want to go to a low cost, course like Coursera or DataCamp or wherever it is that you're getting this information from, there's incredibly low barriers to learning to use the technologies and even to implement them at a small scale. But then to your point of that, like the last mile of deploying a production solution, that's a huge chasm. That's not happening by default.
Yeah. I guess kind of maybe circling back to the AI, like replacing freelancers idea. Are there places that you feel like maybe the work you do or the work that people do that are most at risk currently?
Kind of. I have this graphic that I love. There's a lot of different versions of this, but it's like the mechanic's hourly rate. Like it's $100 an hour is my standard rate. It's $150 an hour if you want to watch me work on your car. It's $175 an hour if you help.
Oh yes.
$200 if you worked on it first, and now I have a lot of backtracking to do. And then $250 an hour if you want to tell me how to do my job. And I feel like some of what I see in the consulting space is that people get their feet wet with some basic knowledge of machine learning or some concept of feature engineering, and they think that it's a lot easier in practice than it is because they've seen a lot of these slick demos. And so they want to have a heavy hand in scoping projects, and they want to push these unrealistic timelines. And they want to say, oh, fine, we'll just plug it into ChatGPT, or we can get some, coding app to do that. But they don't realize that like debugging ChatGPT code can take longer than writing it from scratch, or there's lots of instances where it's not fully baked yet. It's not as good as the humans. And so if you start from that baseline, it's like this mechanic hourly rate, like, oh, you worked on it first with your own chatbot. Great. It's going to cost you more.
Yeah. It's going to take more time for me. Like if you want me to keep what you already built, I have to spend time understanding it, which you don't understand it. So who else is going to understand it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I was yesterday, I did a video. It'll come out here in the next probably few weeks with Jose Brogan. And we were poking around, or he was mostly poking around. I was just asking questions with Databricks, like Genie. It's new kind of thing that they just put out. It was like, supposedly it does get better as you use it, right? Like basically you can ask it questions and it kind of can answer questions on data sets, right, in Databricks. And so again, supposedly it gets better over time. And we were using a fresh instance, but there were like little things that he'd have to like fine tune for. And what I thought was interesting was like he was thinking like a data person, so he could fine tune it, right? Like when it was like, oh, the example that I called out actually earlier in the post was like, or in a post that he posted today, was oh, the where clause ended up in the wrong place. Like it needs to be filtered out later.
Yeah.
But he knows that. If you're a non-technical person, you're going to look at it and be like, the data's wrong, right? Like I think that's generally the way we've all experienced working with the business is you don't get a lot of context. Maybe maybe they call it a number. They'll be like, that number is wrong, but there is zero context on top of that. It's just like, we know that number is wrong. We don't know why that number is wrong, but we know that number is wrong.
Yeah.
And so I do think there's something to that too, where it's like, yeah, it looks really easy, but the problem is it's like masking this other layer of like, well, what if it's wrong? What do we do then? How do we proceed?
I just keep thinking about my mom trying to use semantic language query. Like she was a librarian. She's plenty intelligent. She just doesn't write SQL. And so when you think about what SQL does, I'm absolutely doubling down on trying to improve my skills there, because it used to be good enough to extract 3 to 5 tables, build them into some spreadsheet, get a basic data model going. You could get things that are directionally correct for a revenue or a profit model. You could do it in Tableau. You could do it in some of these older, proprietary databases. I spent a bunch of time doing that kind of work, and I didn't have to be technical at all, but you did have to know exactly, like you're saying, the order of operations of like, do you aggregate before or after that average?
Yeah.
And if I think about a layperson giving semantic language instructions to a SQL editor, it just seems rife with issues, and they're not going to be able to diagnose them or know where they went wrong. And then if you put that on top of a bad data model or virtually unmodeled data, you're not going to know that you're missing a lot of the key inputs that you needed to solve the business problem. Like you have zero external economic factors, or you didn't factor in the war in Ukraine, or I was doing a project years ago around the time of COVID that had been rebooted, and they had all this historical data. They weren't taking into effect that the whole world changed. People drove a lot less right after COVID, right?
Yeah.
And so their historical data wasn't a meaningful predictor of the next 6-12 months. And some person has to think through the exogenous factors in their model and how that aligns with the data. And AI is not bringing that sort of insight. And it makes it really, really valuable for the people who can understand the models and the data at a fundamental level, where they can predict when and how they might go off the rails.
Yeah. No, I think, again, I imagine at some point it'll continue to eat at the jobs we do, but I always feel like it'll take longer than we think. Like what is it? Waymo just made it generally available for everyone to rent cars in San Francisco, which took, I don't know, was it like almost a decade? I don't know what the numbers are, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's like at 10 years essentially to get there.
Yeah.
Now it's going to take probably another 2 to 5 years to get maybe more than just SF. And they've been training on SF. Like they haven't even been training on other places really. Like, yeah, if you go to SF, you would always see Waymos. Like I remember when I moved to the Bay, like, yeah, every other day you'd see a Waymo somewhere in the Bay. So they haven't even trained outside of it. And so it just takes so long to go from just an idea to something more than that.
I think the other huge thing is that, when I was first working, my cousin was about 4 years old, and I would come out and I would stay with her, and she had to show me like how to close the apps in my iPhone. And I had no idea how to like take screenshots or like what games you could play on it. Like I just had no idea how to use it. And my 4-year-old cousin was like, doop, 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 here you go. And there are people who are digital natives, and now there's going to be this generation who are essentially large language model natives, or they have expectations about how and where to use these technologies. But the technologies themselves are growing up in this handicapped architecture where Waymo is the perfect example of they literally have a driver's seat to not have a human driver,
Yeah,
right? Like, how much more effective could that whole design have been if you circumvented the need to run optics as though a person were sitting there?
yeah.
And I think those leaps in these technology spaces, we just don't know what's going to happen there yet. And we're blocked by our own expectations of how things work in a human centered way of working.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like my professor used to say that we will be on Mars and we'll still be using the QWERTY keyboard just because of typewriters. So yeah, it's always funny how hard it is to get rid of design once it's been implemented, because everyone gets used
Yeah.
to it, and then it's just ubiquitous. And as many of my friends who have been like, I retrained myself on whatever keyboard and I'm now putting out 3 times number of letters per second. But
Okay, but now voice to text. So I'm glad you're a good typist.
that's fair. Also, yes, also voice to text. So yes.
Yeah.
In fact, I've been thinking about that recently when I write articles. I'm like, I should just sometimes I'll be on a walk and I'll be writing the article in my head. I'm like, I just need this to because it's almost easier on a walk than it is when you're in front of the keyboard. I'm like, I should just be writing these things when I'm walking versus yeah.
Yeah, there's a startup that's based out here, and the founders have had a really interesting, pretty open process of soliciting feedback. It's a writing tool. Their primary audience at some point was focused around dyslexics, and they have this thing. It used to be called Storied. Now it's VNote, and I've played with it quite a bit. And it's been one of my learning tools for understanding how do these large language models interpret what you're saying. So it's voice to text, and then it will skinny down what I've said into more of a linear flow. And I use it, like you said, when I'm walking or trying to, even in the car, trying to think through my ideas. And I tend to have a mind on random shuffle, like a 50-disc CD player, where it's just there's a set number of things that are floating around all the time, and the recombination is constantly happening. Yeah. So I think tools like that are phenomenal, where it allows you to capture your thoughts in the moment and then format it with, kind of CSS headers with bold headlines and bullet points, and put it in a digestible format for people who are different types of thinkers, more linear thinkers. And, I just think about how atrocious my spelling is, or I can't alphabetize things. There's so many deficits where as a kid, I struggled a lot, and I felt like I just don't think those are relevant. I'm not even sure kids take spelling tests anymore. And so you think of these tools and you think, my God, there's linters, there's IntelliSense. I can't imagine trying to code before there were color-coded, formatted IDEs.
Yes. It's so, yeah. And I'm sure some people are like, no, you got to just do it in Notepad++. But actually, even Notepad++ has some color coding, so I can't even say that. No, that's too funny. The other thing I think I wanted to talk about with you, because you brought up pricing, and I think you work as a pricing analyst, so I'm sure you think about it from this perspective in terms of consulting. A lot of people, for example, I think you did respond to this post on, again, the TFA. I posted about someone who had recently, as he said, he hit the VC lottery, so to speak. No, he was working for Tabular, and he's moving away, and he wants to do consulting. And he put out his formula, which I think is what most people think, or at least some people think when they start consulting. They're like, okay, I need to do my salary times benefits, right? Or sorry, plus benefits, which is whatever 0.25% of my hourly rate, and that's my hourly rate, right? So I think he got to 180 an hour. Usually what I've heard is you do 2 or 3 times. I know sometimes it's harder, especially if you work for Facebook or something, and 2 or 3 times means you're charging what feels like a lot of money. But I think there's a lot of other stuff that goes into it. I posted something to the group talking about how I feel like you need to think of yourself more like a business versus an employee, because you have all these other expenses that don't go into your hourly rate, or at least you're not thinking about in your traditional hourly rate, right? Legal, accounting, insurance, all these other things. But I'd love to kind of hear how you think about pricing, and yeah.
Yeah. There's so many aspects of this. So one of them that you're making me think a lot about is that there's this compensating differentials, that you accept a huge amount of risk as a freelancer, and that depending on where you live, even within the United States, like if you live in Washington, you can pay into a kind of consulting pool and you can have paid family leave. So there are ways that the state will bridge your pay during downtimes. But for the most part, you are self-insuring against periods of unemployment. They don't count as unemployment because you didn't quit a job, or you weren't like laid off from a job. You just aren't working. So you're not paying into those systems, and you don't have your full time to do your project work. You are going to, as a solo consultant or as a freelancer, you're going to have to find either a platform that's going to feed you work and they will take a cut.
Yeah.
I think we both have somewhat negative views of Upwork as like a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
Although totally viable if you need to get started, right? Like if this is better than driving for Uber, then do data projects. So I think that there's a lot there to be said, that like you have to compensate yourself for the increased risk that you are taking on, and that it is lumpy income, and that, yes, you may be building a brand and credibility, but that is a very long range effort. And most people, most small business owners and most consultants are not going to work at it long enough to get the return on that effort.
Yeah. No, I think that's another good point of how I think about it. It's like, yeah, you're just taking this risk where you might not get work again. I mean, I've had steady work, which, that's more because I've built so much content over the last 7 years. But I know a lot of people who are like, yeah, it's hard to get perfectly steady work. The way I view it is like, hey, whenever I have a dip in work, it just means I get a vacation. But it happens infrequently. I think the other thing is like, some people maybe don't think about all the benefits that they're providing to an employee, like to a company, that aren't even the work that you do. Right? Like if a company hires you as a consultant or as a contractor, they don't have to consider firing you. The project just ends. Right? There's no need to think about severance. There's no need to think about what are legal issues we could run into. Right? It's just like, hey, whether it's working or not, whether we just don't have money anymore, it doesn't matter. They can just be like, we're done. Right? Like we give you, maybe you've got a 30-day clause or something, but even there, it's like they might just not have any work for you to do in that 30 days. And so that in itself is a huge cost savings, in my perspective, that you offer just by being temporary. So.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think there are certainly people who would argue that we are very disposable in corporate America these days, and that you're just as temporary there. Yeah. And that there's no federally mandated paid family leave. It's unpaid, right? And there's no mandated short-term or long-term disability insurance. There's no guarantee that your company is going to be investing in upskilling you. And I think what happened with Apple, all the people that were working on autonomous vehicles who didn't find jobs within that massive organization. Yeah. I think they probably got good departure packages, better than if a freelance gig just ends. Yeah. But you can also negotiate that in, right? That you can say, I have a weekly or a monthly minimum retainer. So if you're waiting to give me data and I'm sitting on my hands and you're essentially blocking me from filling my schedule, I want to be paid for that blockage. Or we talked a little bit about outcome-based pricing versus hourly pricing. And I think one of the biggest ways that you buffer your income is that you find where you have places of relative advantage where you wouldn't want to price hourly because you're super efficient at something. And so you price that as a deliverable, and then you build the bandwidth for yourself to do marketing and content development and sales and networking and retraining.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a specific way you like pricing, or is there specific, like, do you have like specific packages and then maybe occasionally you do hourly in certain circumstances?
I think the biggest thing for me is that it's like dating. You are meeting this company and they're trying to put their best face forward, and you can get some red flags, or you can, have a warm introduction from somebody that you respect, but you don't know yet how their organization functions and like where the hatchets are all buried. And the longer you work with that company, the longer that you see that they run their payroll on time and that they can continue to feed you work, or you enjoy the people that you're working with, the more that you can be willing to relax your conditions. Ultimately, for me, consulting is much more about feeling good about the work that I do and enjoying working than it is about pure income. And so I like to start with, like very rapid first date, right? I want to see what your data is, who's working with it, how do your systems interface with each other. And then so I'll do this baseline assessment, and we'll prioritize and rank different opportunities that you might want to pursue. But I don't want to bid a giant project until I know that I can deliver on it. And so I think that's a really good strategy, is to have a fixed fee period at the beginning of a relationship. And then if you become more embedded in the company and you're working with them over time, maybe you do transition more to an hourly contribution, and you're more like staff augmentation in a specialized role that they don't want to hire full time. I think there's lots of ways you can structure it, but you should think upfront about protecting yourself about what your interests are going to be when you first land it, and then over time as you continue to work with that client.
Yeah. No, I like that kind of thinking where it's like, like dating. I think it's I always hold my breath for the first payment, which is why I like generally have a down payment first, because I was tired of like waiting, being like, oh, it's going to cost this much, and like I have to do the work first, then do 30 days, and and then suddenly it's like 60 days till you get paid, which I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. But yeah, especially early on, it's like, will I get paid? Will they pay me on time? Do I have to like follow up with them every 3 weeks? Be like, hey, where's this invoice? Like, I sent it.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel like I'm having to nag you all the time. Like, please just, I did work, so please pay me.
Yeah. Which I think is a friction that even if you don't like the rate that your employer is paying you at, it's known to be an egregious outcome if a W-2 employee misses a paycheck, right? Like that is taken as fairly serious, but it's super common in consulting.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great way of thinking about it, where it's like, yeah, in consulting happens all the time. Like something, it's like, you're like, okay, it's been 4 weeks, like kind of a 30-day term. Like now I got to go, chase you down. And I don't want to be the person that's like, I'll charge you 1% for every day this is late or something. It's like, I don't want to be that guy.
What's
or
the
that
thing?
person. Yeah. Right. Like I don't want to be this, no one wants that either. So
yeah. Well, and especially if the person that you're going through to get paid is the person that you're interfacing most with on your project, like depending on the company, it's not some faceless, nameless accounts receivable department, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like having to re-justify your value every time you submit an invoice.
Yes. So I guess like with that in mind, like how do you like go about pricing most of your projects?
I think the projects that I really want to do, I price really aggressively. And I think that there's some strategic aspect to it for me where I'm just really interested in the work, or I like the people, or I think it fits in my schedule at a particularly, good point in time. So ideally, if I could just work like maybe from October to the end of March every year, I would probably just do that. Like
Yeah.
I would just work seasonally in the winter and spend those dark, cold days at my computer and spend a lot of days outside. Um, so I have like a seasonal pricing in my head about
Oh.
when I really want to work versus when I don't necessarily want to. And then also just the people that I want to do projects with where I feel like I will learn a ton from them or that we have really complementary skill sets. And so if somebody else is selling a project and I don't have to be the biz dev lead, I'm more than happy to give them my hourly rate and they can gross that up to their client however much they want to. Happy to collaborate with individual people. And I think that's a pretty fair concept if you know that you're not doing sales, marketing, invoicing, if you're working through somebody as like a subcontractor, you need to mentally adjust your rates.
Yeah, it's obviously, like you said, it's very different if you're working through someone. I think it's nice to occasionally have, like in terms of like trying to smooth out the lumpiness, it's nice to occasionally have maybe a person or two or a company or two that you contract through. Because they're it's weird. Sometimes marketing and content work great for landing clients, and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes having someone that's more salesy, which maybe that's something you don't do, is a great way to do it. So yeah, I definitely like having a few different ways that clients come to me, and then I don't mind sometimes someone else marking up my rate. It's like because I think you referenced in the post that if you're talking about like even IBM consulting or any of them, they're easily charging $350 to $500 an hour for someone with 2 years of experience. But they just named senior principal data science consultant. Despite them not necessarily having that depth of
Import
knowledge.
Pandas as PD off and running.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, it's not to, if that's anyone's role out there, it's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way the industry works. They have tons of expenses that they have to cover. And they have to pay their partners lots of money. So that's coming from somewhere.
Yeah. I think, when I work on pricing within a company, there's a lot of saber rattling and kind of grand ideas about like how you should hold to your value line and really understand your market. And on an individual level, it goes back to the risk reward, where if what you're trying to maximize is your hourly rate and you just want to occasionally work projects at high rates and have potentially a lot of time off, or work for 3 to 5 years at those high rates and then, peace out, you are maximizing a different thing. And I've been reading a ton of Morgan Housel lately and Shane Farish, and they talk about playing your own game. Like, what is your optimization function for you? Don't play somebody else's game. Don't try to win at, like, I'm not going to compete with Seattle Data Guy for projects or rates or income. Like, it's just not what I'm trying to maximize. I have a 4-year-old. I want to be outside. I want lots of downtime. Like, you have to think through the fact that if you wanted to operate under a completely different system, you would have to wholesale swap the entire system. I would have to be doing content marketing, and I would have to be in a technical track or have whatever the educational pedigree or the work pedigree in a certain context in order to do that. And if you don't orient your whole life toward that, then you should expect to be at a different end of that income spectrum or a different end of that continuity of work.
Yeah, I like that. It's one of those things where, like, the jealousy is the thief of all joy, so to speak, right? Like, if you don't seriously look at what you're actually trying to do and like why you're trying to do it, and again, trying to find a job, trying to find, if you want to do consulting, whatever it is, like, you're just going to look at other people and be like, well, I want to do what they're doing because they make a lot of money, or because they, I don't know, maybe work on a project you perceive to be cool. But yeah, I do think there's something to like trying to figure out what you want in the actual end, right? Like, okay, let's say you had, like, I remember someone once asked me, like, if you had like whatever, $20 million, like, what would you do? Right. And it's one of those hard, like, you sit there and you're like, what would I, like, are you going to work? Probably not, at least not the same. Right.
Call
Some people will be
somebody
like,
at NVIDIA, find out.
yeah. Yes. Call someone at NVIDIA. Exactly. But, that is an interesting thought where it's like, what would you do if you had this amount of money and weren't in the Bay? Because maybe the one downside to the Bay is like, yeah, you can have $10 million, but it's like our house is 2. So, and actually, that's not even a nice house. That's just a rundown house somewhere. A nice house is like 3 to 4. So you lose a lot of it very quickly. But yeah, I think that is a good exercise to occasionally try to think for yourself, to be like, well, if I did have all this free time, or at least no responsibility in terms of money, like what would I do that time? How would I spend my life? And try to get your life as close to that as possible, I guess.
I think if you want to loop this back to consulting in the age of AI, one of the biggest things to think about is how fast the pace of technology is changing. Rita McGrath has this book, The End of Competitive Advantage, and it just says, like, competitive advantage isn't sustainable. It's all about innovation and positioning yourself strategically in the market to garner the return on that innovation. And I think I keep going back to this period when I was in college. I had taken environmental economics instead of just intro to microeconomics. It's a very Vermont thing to do. And then the next semester, I got hired on as a supplemental instructor for microeconomics, which I hadn't taken. And so you're just always trying to stay one chapter ahead of the class and make sure that you knew it well enough not to get, found out or to diminish other people's learning outcomes. And I think that's so true of consulting, especially now in a technology space. You just have to be willing to go out there and try things and to put your hands on the keyboard and see what does and doesn't work. And like I said, with VNote, there are these AI technologies. And when you start to see how things systematically fail, you can translate those learnings to other projects. And founders of these companies like LangChain and Llama Index, they're relatively young. Like, I don't feel that old. I'm 40, but like, these guys are younger than me by a lot. And they are still doing pioneering, interesting things. And, there's no reason they shouldn't be CEOs of those companies. Like, Zuck was however old when he did Facebook. But the idea that it's tons and tons of years of experience is probably less relevant than being pragmatic and practical and applied. And some of it's just AI hype that they're getting VC money and these things are going to fizzle. But some of it is real, that they're innovating and inventing and getting a return on those innovations. And it happens not just in product-based companies, but it happens in knowledge-based consulting organizations too.
Yeah. No, I think that's I really do think it is up to you on how much you want to kind of stay ahead. But I also like that example that you gave where it's like you just have to kind of stay one chapter ahead, where I think a lot of people feel like they have to be the expert in the space, or they maybe feel stressed that things are changing so fast. But the thing is, everyone feels that. Like, that is the baseline for everyone. Currently feels stressed that things are changing so fast. So if you can figure out how to just be confident in a little part of that, just that much more confident, because again, you've tested it out, you're trying things, you're trying to learn, you can actually provide advice. I don't remember where I read this, where it's like, changes in like the fact that things change in technology so much and the stress that comes with that is a good thing for consultants. Because if you're good at consulting, and if you're good at like figuring out what all this means and putting together kind of a framework or things around it, and delivering outcomes to companies through that, like, that puts you ahead of everyone else who's just sitting there like, oh man, is my job going to be lost because of AI? Like, well, yeah, figure it out. Like, what does it mean? What does it mean for your industry? If you're the person that figures that out, congrats, you've just found something to keep you busy for the next 5 to 10 years, probably.
Yeah. And I think kind of going back to the idea of what is the future of work, or why would you freelance versus work inside a company, at least in pricing, there are pricing managers and directors and maybe even VPs that are staying in their role for 18 months. And that's true of data leaders too. And that's really hardly time to understand the ins and outs of the business. And so even on the in-house side of things, they may have less total experience than if you've done, 3 or 5 projects in an industry. So I think it is really just interesting that there's some level of churn in the employee marketplace and tenure of consultants where you're kind of converging on a similar level of expertise from really different vantage points.
Yeah. Well, I also don't want to keep you too long. We're almost at an hour, so I want to appreciate everything that you've said and everything you kind of brought, whether it be about AI in freelancing or pricing. But I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts as we kind of wrap up here?
Just really thank you. What you're contributing to bring other people along and empower them to launch their own freelancing consulting careers, I think is super valuable. And as this develops, I would love to hear from a legal expert or from, somebody who does personal finance planning and kind of the trade-off between different career tracks. I think there's so many avenues that you could explore this, and people really benefit from the candid sharing of individual experiences.
Yeah. I like that, especially like the finance, because I think that's one of those hard things, like, because you don't have a 401k, or at least not a traditional one. It's like, how do I handle 401k? Because, I think I can still do matching. If I recall, I think my accountant does matching for me, like through my business. My business does matching for me, if I recall. I don't remember. Again, this is why you get accountants. This is why this is why you get accountants. This is why you get, like, for me, I'm like, I think this is what happens. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, how do you do that? And then, benefit from the tax benefits of that, etc. So no, I think that's also all helpful. It's not just about the marketing, and I'm trying to figure out, like, what other avenues do I add here? It's like, I can add my perspective, which a lot of it's like, here's content, here's some sales stuff, here's some like making proposals, but there's everything around it that I think is also fascinating. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Christine. I don't have any more questions. Do you have any other final thoughts?
No, just thank you, and keep doing what you're doing. I know a lot of people get a lot of value out of what you publish.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching. All right.
Bye.
I'm going to hit end stream.